Chapter 1. Pain bloomed behind Briar's eyes. A crushing weight made the world spin. She inhaled a deep, fractured breath. Pine. The scent was sharp pine and the biting cold of an impending blizzard. The mattress beneath her felt colossal. It was draped in thick furs that radiated the feral scent of an untamed beast. She scrambled backward. Her spine collided hard against the carved headboard. Her pulse hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was not supposed to be here. She only wanted a place to hide. Last night the sedative had burned her throat. She had fled the banquet hall, escaping the predatory stare of a vile alpha who saw a mute omega as easy prey. She had stumbled into the forbidden wing. She had crawled into the shadows of the king's own chambers. She only meant to close her eyes for a fleeting second until the halls cleared. Now she was awake, and she was not alone. In the darkest corner of the cavernous room, a silhouette sat motionless. He carried a suffocating pressure. He was a towering figure carved from shadows and violence. One leg rested casually over the other. A silver broadsword lay discarded on the stone floor, its blade still slick with dark, fresh blood. The crimson drops stained the ancient rugs beneath his boots. Alpha King Lorcan Thorne, the Tyrant of Valthorne. Briar forgot how to breathe. The air in the room grew thick. It tasted of copper and the crushing weight of his aura. He was a monster born of slaughter. The blood curse, they called it. A dark magic that plagued his mind with the deafening screams of the dead, driving him into uncontrollable frenzies. The blood on his sword told the story of this night. He had hunted. He had butchered to quiet the voices. Yet, as the moonlight caught his face, those amber eyes were locked entirely on her. His chest rose and fell in a slow, leaden rhythm. The feral madness that usually clouded his gaze was absent. In its place was a terrifying clarity, the absolute focus of an apex predator. Briar trembled. She raised her hands, her fingers shaking as she formed the desperate shapes of silent language. "Please." She signed, her hands frantically carving the plea into the empty air. "Spare my life. I will leave immediately." "I meant no offense." Lorcan stared at her hands. He looked down at her pale, tightly pressed lips. He tilted his head. The movement was slow, calculated, exactly like a wolf studying a strange, tiny fawn that had wandered into his den. "You make no sound." His voice was a low, dark rumble. It vibrated straight into her marrow. "Even your heartbeat is so terribly quiet." Briar froze. She clasped her hands together in one final wordless prayer for mercy. For the first time in a decade, Lorcan's mind was not a tempest of agonizing screams. The relentless voices of the dead had evaporated. They were replaced by a profound, echoing silence radiating from the small, trembling creature on his bed. Her scent, a delicate weave of rain-soaked petals and still earth, acted as an anchor. It dragged his fractured soul back from the abyss. She was the most potent balm for his cursed, agonizing existence. He stood up. His imposing size was terrifying. He closed the distance between them with a lethal, fluid grace. Briar pressed herself harder into the headboard. A silent scream choked in her throat. She raised her hands, ready to sign again, to beg, to pray. Lorcan did not let her. He reached out. His large, calloused hands captured her wrists. His grip felt like iron shackles, yet strangely, it carried no cruelty. He pinned her arms down effortlessly, locking them against the soft mattress. The bed dipped sharply under his heavy weight. He leaned over her. His broad chest trapped her completely. Briar squeezed her eyes shut. She braced for the lethal strike, the brutal bite that would tear her throat apart. Instead, he dropped his head. He buried his face deep into the crook of her neck. His nose brushed against her frantic pulse point. He inhaled. It was a long, deep breath that seemed to pull her very essence into his lungs. The blistering heat of his skin collided violently with the icy terror in her veins. Slowly, the sheer warmth of his body began to melt, the dread freezing her bones. An undeniable, traitorous spark of connection flickered in her chest. "Do not even think of running," he growled against her collarbone, his dark voice dripping with absolute possession. "From now on, you are my tribute pillow." Chapter 2. Pale morning light pierced the stained glass of the forbidden wing. Briar burrowed deeper into the furs, her muscles strung tight. The blistering heat of Lorcan's skin still lingered against her own, a terrifying reminder of the night before. He had not torn her apart. He had merely held her, burying his face in her neck until a deep, vibrating rumble echoed from his chest in sleep. Suddenly, the colossal oak doors burst open. Rushed footsteps shattered the quiet. Briar jolted, frantically pulling a mink blanket up to her chin. Across the room, Lorcan was already awake. He stood tall, his bare, scarred chest exposed as he carelessly threw on a black velvet robe. The feral madness of last night was securely locked behind razor-sharp amber eyes. "Your Majesty," a dry voice echoed. Bastion, the beta guard and royal strategist stepped inside without a flinch at the suffocating aura. "The Council of Elders is gathering in the Great Hall. They brought Lady Isolde. They demand you honor the political alliance." Lorcan growled. The sound scraped like stone, carrying a dormant violence ready to erupt. Briar held her breath. She understood perfectly well. A forced marriage. She shrank further into the shadows of the imposing bed, praying for invisibility. But Lorcan pivoted sharply, his gaze pinned her down. The look held no tenderness, only the tyrannical possession of a predator finding the perfect instrument. He closed the distance in 3 long strides. Before Briar could react, he ripped the blankets away and lifted her effortlessly into his steely arms. She thrashed wildly, her lips parting in a desperate, silent protest. "Put me down!" Her hands scrambled to form the frantic signs. "Keep your mouth shut, Omega Ain," he rumbled, ignoring the bitter irony of his command. He crushed her against his solid chest. "You will play the part of a willing tribute." Bastion raised a brow, his eyes flicking to Briar. He subtly lifted a hand, flashing a butchered sign. "Silly duck?" Briar glared at the insolent beta, infuriated but utterly powerless. Lorcan marched straight into the great hall, carrying Briar like a conquered prize. Dozens of ancient eyes locked onto them, widening in sheer disbelief and disdain. Lady Isolde stood at the center, her beautiful features twisting in fury. "Your Majesty!" The head elder struck his staff against the stone floor. "What is the meaning of bringing this broken creature here? The alliance—" "There is no alliance," Lorcan interrupted, his voice booming like thunder across the cavernous space. He tightened his grip on Briar's waist, lifting her chin for the entire court to witness. "This is my fated mate, and she is currently carrying the heir to the Valthorne throne." A dead silence consumed the room. Briar's eyes widened in sheer horror. Her pulse skyrocketed. "Pregnant?" She pounded her fists against his chest in silent denial, but he only smirked, capturing both her wrists in one hand. "Anyone who dares threaten her, or the child," Lorcan snarled, his eyes flashing a lethal crimson, "will have their throat ripped out by my own teeth." By late afternoon, Briar was forced to sign a binding pact, a false marriage. She would act as his adored wife, and in exchange, he would shield her from all enemies. But the parchment could not account for the cruelty of the night. When the moon reached its peak, the air in the bedchamber thickened with the metallic tang of blood. The blood curse, dormant since dawn, suddenly flared with apocalyptic fury. Briar was curled at the edge of the mattress when the sickening snap of bones echoed. She spun around, her blood turning to ice. Lorcan convulsed on the floor. His form expanded violently, pitch-black fur tearing through human skin. He was shifting in a haze of pure agony. Those amber eyes were now entirely hollow, bleeding a murderous red. The towering beast released an earth-shattering roar. It lunged at the bed. Briar was crushed into the mattress. Two lethal fangs, dripping with thick saliva, hovered mere inches from her frantically beating pulse. It snarled. The monster no longer recognized her at all. Chapter 3. The towering beast pressed down on Briar, its scorching breath washing over her face. Two lethal fangs hovered a fraction of an inch from her throat. A single bite would sever her fragile life completely. Lorcan's blood-red eyes held absolutely no reason. The dark magic had swallowed his soul, leaving only a deranged predator. Briar squeezed her eyes shut. Her heart battered against her ribs, the frantic rhythm of prey facing the reaper. Yet amidst the crushing terror, a strange instinct bloomed within her chest. She did not struggle. Panic would only trigger the beast to strike. Instead, she slowly opened her eyes. With trembling fingers, she reached out to the coarse black fur on his broad chest. She dug her small hands into the thick coat, stroking the rigid muscles. She pressed her chest firmly against his, forcing her erratic heartbeat to steady, offering a calm rhythm to his colossal frame. Her scent, that delicate weave of rain-soaked petals and still earth, flared brilliantly, wrapping around his chaotic madness. The wolf emitted a choked, fractured sound. The crimson gaze flickered, a sliver of confusion breaking the murderous haze. It buried its massive head into her neck, inhaling her cooling fragrance like a dying man finding water. The rapid, violent breathing slowly smoothed out. He collapsed beside her, shifting back into a fiercely muscled man, and locked his arms around her like an anchor in a raging storm. When a pale sunrise filtered through the velvet curtains, Lorcan awoke. An agonizing ache in his bones reminded him of the brutal shift. He looked down. Briar was fast asleep, curled securely against his side. A crushing guilt slammed into the tyrant's chest. He had nearly butchered her. He had bared his fangs at the most vulnerable point of a creature who could not even scream for mercy. He carefully disentangled himself, slipping from the bed before she could stir. He wrapped himself in his usual ruthless indifference, vowing to maintain his distance. His proximity was a death sentence for her, but keeping his distance became the most impossible task he had ever attempted. Over the following days, a tense quiet settled over the palace. The king maintained a frigid exterior, yet his eyes tracked his fake bride constantly. They communicated through hurried scratches on a leather-bound notepad. "Does it hurt?" she wrote, pushing the book toward him after a grueling council meeting left him rubbing his temples. Lorcan stared at the ink, then looked up into her perceptive eyes. "I am fine," he muttered, turning away to hide the fracture in his icy armor. He realized with a bitter sting that he didn't just crave her silence to soothe the curse. He was addicted to her breath, her handwriting, her accidental touches. Then, the extreme jealousy surfaced. During a fading twilight, Lorcan stood on a stone balcony, his amber gaze drilling into the courtyard below. Bastion stood much too close behind Briar, guiding her posture as she held a throwing knife. The beta smirked, placing a large hand on her arm to adjust the aim. Briar smiled. a rare, brilliant expression that belonged only to her. A fractured, low growl tore from Lorcan's throat. The marble railing cracked under his crushing grip. The beast inside clawed wildly, demanding he leap down and snap the neck of the man touching his mate. But before he could act, warning horns shattered the evening sky. Rebel forces had breached the northern border. He was forced to depart immediately, carrying a blazing, unresolved possessiveness. He did not know that his departure opened the gates for a ghost from the past. The moment Lorcan's forces disappeared beyond the valley, a foreign envoy rode into the courtyard. The leader was the exact vile Alpha who had hunted Briar on that fateful night. Taking advantage of the palace's chaotic military deployment, the envoy slipped into the western gardens. He found Briar standing alone among the dying winter roses. "Well, well," he hissed, stepping from the shadows with a sickening grin. "The little mute lamb. Did you think hiding in a madman's bed would save you?" Briar backed away, her eyes wide with terror. She turned to run, but the Alpha lunged like lightning, slamming her violently against the freezing stone wall. From his cloak, he produced a gleaming silver chain, its links weeping a sickly, lethal, green poison. "Your king is not here to save you," he whispered savagely, pressing the toxic metal against her throat. "And this time, no one will hear you cry, little mute." Chapter 4. The silver chain bit into the delicate skin of Briar's neck. A single drop of crimson welled to the surface, mixing with the sickening green poison. The envoy leaned in, his foul breath smelling of stale wine and rot. Suddenly, the heavy iron gates of the garden shattered. A colossal roar tore through the twilight. Lorcan burst into the courtyard. His chest heaved violently, his armor dented from a desperate, frantic ride. He had realized the northern breach was a decoy. He had returned for her, but he was too late. "Right on time, Your Majesty," the envoy sneered. He did not raise his sword. Instead, he pulled a jagged obsidian stone from his pocket. It pulsed with a vile, suffocating, dark magic. He crushed it in his palm. A shockwave of pure, condensed malice exploded outward. It struck Lorcan square in the chest. The Alpha King crashed to the freezing stone path. A gut-wrenching scream ripped from his throat. The blood curse, magnified 100-fold by the dark stone, erupted in his veins. Black veins crawled up his neck. The beast inside him shrieked in absolute agony, tearing at his own mind. He clawed at the stone, his massive frame shuddering violently as the curse prepared to shred his soul from the inside out. The envoy threw his head back and laughed. He dropped Briar's chain, drawing a long dagger to finish the paralyzed king. Briar watched the man she was supposed to fake a marriage with, the monster who had become her fragile sanctuary, dying on the cold ground. Her hands trembled. She looked down at the leather-bound notepad clutched in her fingers. The safety of her silence, the mask she had worn for 10 agonizing years. She let it go. The book hit the stone path with a soft thud. Briar stepped forward. She did not sign. She did not cower. She opened her mouth. For a decade, the world believed she was broken. They believed she was physically incapable of sound. They were wrong. She was not mute. She carried the ancient, dormant bloodline of the Siren Alpha, the Dominator. Her voice was not a weakness. It was an absolute world-bending weapon. She took a fractured breath, drawing the freezing winter air deep into her lungs, and she spoke. "Kneel." The single ancient word did not just echo in the air. It violently shattered the fabric of reality. It was a sound of terrifying, absolute authority that bypassed the ears and struck directly into the marrow of every wolf in the vicinity. The envoy froze mid-stride. The oppressive weight of a true ancient Alpha slammed into his spine. With a sickening crunch, both of his knees shattered against the cobblestones. He collapsed, blood violently erupting from his nose and mouth as his body was forcibly crushed by the sheer magnitude of her command. He could not lift a finger. He could not even breathe without her permission. Briar ignored the dying envoy. She turned her gaze to the agonizing king on the ground. She spoke again, her voice softening into a radiant melodic resonance that flowed straight into Lorcan's shattered mind. Awaken. The command washed over him like a tidal wave of pure, blinding light. The deafening screams of the dead vanished instantly. The crippling darkness of the blood curse was incinerated, scrubbed clean from his soul in a single heartbeat. The agonizing pain evaporated, leaving behind a profound roaring surge of untainted power. His true wolf, freed from the chains of the curse at last, opened its eyes, but the forbidden magic demanded a devastating toll. The moment the word left her lips, Briar's vision blurred. The overwhelming power drained her life force in an instant. The crushing winter cold rushed back into her bones. She swayed, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the frost-covered grass. The heavy footsteps of a dozen men echoed through the garden. The council of elders and the royal guard, having heard the commotion, poured into the courtyard. They stopped dead in their tracks. They saw the bleeding envoy. They felt the lingering, terrifying aura of the ancient siren magic, a power the council had declared heretical and hunted to extinction centuries ago. The head elder's eyes widened in pure horror and disgust. He pointed a trembling finger at the unconscious, fragile girl on the ground. "A siren. She is an abomination," he shrieked. "Kill her." 100 silver-tipped spears were instantly leveled at Briar's motionless body. Chapter 5. The head elder's command hung in the freezing air. 100 silver-tipped spears thrust forward, forming a deadly glinting ring around Briar's motionless body. The soldiers hesitated, their breaths pluming in the winter cold, but their weapons remained locked on the unconscious girl. They did not understand what they had just awakened. A low, terrifying vibration began to shake the courtyard stones. It was not a mere growl. It was a catastrophic seismic event. The sheer pressure of it cracked the marble fountains and shattered the remaining stained glass in the western wing, raining glittering shards onto the frost. Lorcan Thorne rose from the ground. He did not shift into a wolf. He did not need to. The raw, unadulterated power of a true Alpha King, finally purged of the agonizing blood curse, radiated from his towering frame like a dark, crushing star. His amber eyes burned with a lethal, incandescent fury that promised absolute ruin. The oppressive scent of winter pine and lightning suffocated everyone in the garden, dropping the temperature even further. "You dare!" Lorcan's voice was a devastating guttural rumble. "Point your weapons at my queen." The head elder took a trembling step backward, his ancient face draining of color. "Your Majesty, she is a siren. The ancient texts demand her immediate execution. Her kind subjugates our nature. She is an abomination." "She is my mate," Lorcan snarled, baring his teeth. He moved faster than human eyes could track. In a fluid blur of lethal shadow, he crossed the courtyard. He did not bother drawing his broadsword. He drove his bare fist straight through the silver armor of the nearest royal guard, crushing the man's ribcage with a sickening, wet impact. Chaos erupted. The council shouted frantic orders, but the guards were paralyzed by sheer primal terror. Lorcan was a god of war, unleashed upon mortals. He tore through the armored men with brutal, calculated violence. He snapped heavy iron spears like fragile twigs. He fractured bones and shattered blind loyalties with every sweeping strike. Steaming, dark crimson painted the frost-covered grass, the metallic scent of fresh blood mingling with the bitter winter air. Bastian sprinted into the ruined garden, his own sword drawn. The beta took one look at the relentless slaughter, then at the cowardly head elder, and immediately positioned himself to block the main exits. "No body leaves," Bastian commanded coldly, slamming the heavy iron gates shut and locking them tight. Lorcan grabbed the head elder by his lavish silk robes, lifting the old man completely off the ground. The tyrant's grip was an inescapable iron vice around his throat. "Listen to me very carefully," Lorcan whispered. His tone dripped with absolute bone-chilling menace. "I do not care about your ancient laws. I do not care about your sacred texts. If she is a heretic, then I am her most devoted follower. She is the only religion this kingdom will ever bow to. Do you understand?" The elder choked, nodding frantically as his face turned a pale, sickly blue from the lack of oxygen. Lorcan threw him aside like worthless garbage. The remaining guards dropped their weapons instantly, falling to their knees in absolute trembling submission. The king ignored them all. His terrifying, bloodthirsty aura vanished the exact second his amber gaze landed back on Briar. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees on the blood-slicked stones. He gathered her small, fragile form into his arms, pulling her firmly against his broad, muscular chest. "Briar," he murmured. The lethal tyrant was instantly replaced by a desperate, terrified man. "I am here. You are safe. Open your eyes." But she did not move. Lorcan touched her pale cheek and pulled his hand back in shock. Her skin was burning with a terrifying, unnatural heat. The ancient siren magic she had unleashed to save him was a parasitic force. It had remained dormant in her blood for a decade, and now, forcibly awakened, it was incinerating her delicate veins from the inside out. Beneath his desperate fingertips, her pulse was rapidly failing. It was a chaotic, fading flutter, exactly like a dying moth trapped in a glass lantern. Her scent, the delicate rain-soaked petals he desperately loved, was turning into the bitter, acrid ash of a burning forest. A sound of pure, helpless agony tore from Lorcan's throat. He clutched her burning body against his heart, burying his face in her dark hair, uncaring of the blood staining his clothes. "Bastian!" the Alpha King roared. It was a sound of absolute shattering heartbreak that echoed into the dark, indifferent winter sky. Get the healers. Now. But deep down, his wolf knew the devastating truth. No human medicine could stop an ancient magic from claiming its ultimate toll. The brilliant light in his mate's soul was extinguishing, and the most powerful king in the world was completely, utterly powerless to stop it. Chapter 6. The palace healers were entirely useless. They backed away from the colossal bed, their hands trembling as the unnatural heat radiating from Briar blistered their fingertips. Lorcan threw them all out. He slammed the imposing oak doors shut, plunging the chamber into a suffocating, desperate silence. He collapsed to his knees beside the mattress. The lethal tyrant who had just slaughtered his own royal guard to protect her was gone. In his place was a shattered man, clutching the fragile, burning hand of his mate. Briar's breath came in shallow, fractured gasps. Her veins glowed with a sickening, ethereal light beneath her pale skin. The siren magic was a parasite. It had fed on her life force to obliterate his curse, and now it was burning her to ash from the inside out. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused, but she found his amber eyes. "Lorcan," she whispered. Her true voice was a broken melody, weak and fading. "It is all right. Let me go." A single scalding tear broke from the Alpha King's eye. It fell onto her burning knuckles. "No," he choked out, his broad shoulders shaking. He pressed his forehead against her palm, dropping every ounce of his pride, every shred of his royal dignity. "You do not get to save me and then leave me in the dark. I forbid it. I am begging you, Briar. Do not leave me." She tried to smile, but she lacked the strength. "I am so tired of being quiet." "Then scream," he pleaded, his voice cracking with raw agony. "Yell at me. Curse my name, but stay. I swear on my soul I will use my own life as your shield, so you never have to be silent again." Briar looked at him. She saw the pure, devastating love radiating from the wild beast. There was only one way to anchor a volatile, ancient magic. It required an equally ancient, boundless source of life, a true Alpha's life force, tethered through the sacred marking. "Mark me," she breathed out, tilting her neck back to expose her vulnerable throat. "Claim me, Lorcan." He froze. The mating bite was a brutal, primal act. To perform it while she was so weak could kill her instantly, but to do nothing guaranteed her death. He leaned over her. His amber eyes burned with a fierce, desperate light. "It will hurt," he whispered, brushing a damp strand of hair from her feverish forehead. "But I will tether your soul to mine. I will not let you fall." She reached up, her trembling fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I trust you." Lorcan lowered his head. His lips brushed against the erratic pulse point at her collarbone. He inhaled the fading scent of her rain-soaked petals, committing it to his very marrow. Then, his jaw unhinged and his lethal fangs elongated. He sank his teeth deep into the crook of her neck. Briar gasped, her spine arching off the mattress. A sharp, piercing pain erupted at the bite mark, but it was immediately swallowed by a rushing inferno. Lorcan's pure, dominant alpha energy flooded her veins. It was a torrential river of strength, colliding violently with the burning siren magic. The two ancient forces crashed, fought, and then, guided by the profound soul bond of the mates, they intertwined. Lorcan tasted her blood, sweet and metallic. He drew her essence into himself, wrapping his colossal aura around her fragile heart. He forced his own steady, thundering heartbeat to dictate hers. "Live," his soul commanded through the tether. "Live for me." Slowly, the unnatural fever broke. The blinding glow beneath her skin faded. The scent of burning ash was washed away by the crisp, soothing aroma of winter pine and fresh rain. Briar slumped back onto the pillows, exhausted but anchored. The bond hummed between them, a golden, unbreakable thread forging two broken souls into a singular, undeniable force. Lorcan slowly pulled back, his fangs retracting. He licked the twin puncture wounds, his saliva instantly sealing the broken skin and leaving behind a permanent, scarred crescent. He gathered her into his arms, burying his face in her hair as she drifted into a deep, healing sleep. 2 months later, the great hall was unrecognizable. The treacherous council of elders had been entirely replaced. The throne room was bathed in brilliant sunlight, the oppressive shadows of the tyrant's past banished forever. Lorcan sat upon the obsidian throne, an imposing, majestic figure radiating absolute sovereignty. But the kingdom's true reverence was directed at the woman seated on the identical throne beside him. Queen Briar wore a gown of deep emerald. She was no longer the silent, broken Omega hiding in the shadows. She possessed the fierce, terrifying grace of a Siren Alpha, her mere presence commanding absolute devotion from every wolf in the room. The claiming mark on her neck was displayed proudly, a symbol of her survival and their unbreakable bond. At the base of the dais, Bastian stood with his arms crossed, watching the nobles bow deeply before the royal couple. Briar leaned gracefully toward the beta. Bastian, her melodic voice carried effortlessly over the quiet hall. Your posture is atrocious today. Did you sleep in the stables again? Lorcan let out a low, rumbling laugh, the sound rich and full of life. His hand reached out, intertwining his fingers with hers. Bastian sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples. I miss the days when you communicated with that little notepad, my queen. At least back then, your insults took a few seconds longer to decipher. Briar smiled, squeezing her mate's hand. She turned her gaze to Lorcan. His amber eyes were soft, reflecting a world of peace he had never known before her. She didn't need to speak to tell him what he meant to her. The bond pulsed with a love so profound, it rivaled the ancient magic in their blood. She had walked into the dark to hide, but instead she had found her light, and the Alpha King, once haunted by the screams of the dead, had finally found the one voice he would listen to for the rest of eternity.